Hi, I'm Dr. Sandler. I'm a psychologist with Boomerang Healthcare, and today we're talking about navigating workers' comp. So, first of all, like I just said, I'm a psychologist. I am not a lawyer. I'm certainly not your lawyer. I'm not a workers' comp expert. I'm not a vocational rehabilitation expert. So, everything in this lecture is general information and general advice for individuals dealing with the workers' compensation system. Lecture is geared towards patients that are in FRP, or Functional Restoration Program, but this information should be relevant to anyone that is going through the workers' compensation system, as well as providers who want to better understand the work comp system and what patients are experiencing. So there's a lot to talk about with work comp. We're going to be focusing on the pathway of the patient through the work comp system from beginning to end and the benefits that are available to you in that system. So what is workers comp? Basically, if you get hurt on the job, your employer is required by law to provide workers' compensation benefits. So workers' compensation is for any injury in the context of work. You could get hurt by a single event at work, such as falling off a ladder, maybe someone attacks you as a security guard, for example, maybe you smash your hand with a hammer. These are all covered by work comp as single events. There's also repeated exposures at work. For example, maybe you type a lot. There isn't a single event where you were injured. It's just that typing a lot over time eventually injures you. These are both covered by workers' compensation. It doesn't matter if it's a single event, if there's multiple events or repeated events. What matters is that you were injured in the context of your work. If so, should be covered by workers' compensation. Did you know that you receive benefits no matter who is at fault for your job injury? So workers' compensation is a no-fault system, which means that it doesn't matter if you injure yourself, it doesn't matter if someone else injures you, it doesn't matter if like a wall falls on top of you and you're injured. Doesn't matter who's at fault, you're still entitled to the workers' compensation benefits, including medical treatment. Part of the deal of workers' compensation is you can't sue your employer for a job injury, but in return, you get access to the medical care and benefits of work comp. So this is essentially the deal that was struck, was that before workers' compensation, people used to sue their employers, sometimes for multi-million-dollar suits, put them out of business. So the deal was struck that you can't sue your employer, but in return, they provide these protections and benefits of the workers' compensation system. Did you know it's illegal for your employer to punish or fire you for having a job injury or for requesting workers' compensation benefits when you believe your injury was caused by your job? So a lot of people are afraid to report their injury in the first place or to file a claim with workers' compensation. However, it is illegal for your employer to punish you or fire you for having an injury in the first place or for filing for workers' comp. Punishing you for that is considered retaliation, and it is very illegal. So everyone in the workers' compensation essentially follows the same pathway through it from beginning to end. It's not going to be exactly the same for everyone, of course, but I'm going to put forward this kind of four-step understanding of your pathway through the workers' comp system. And then we'll go through it step by step, talking about the different things that happen at each step and different benefits that are available. So first of all, step one, injury at work always is what starts this process. Doesn't matter if you're injured at home or whatever else, but if your injury is in the context of your job, then you at some point notify your supervisor and file a workers' compensation claim. If you're in FRP and watching this, that means that your claim is long since accepted. Right, so there is a process of the claim being accepted or not. Eventually, that claim is accepted, and that's what gives you access to the benefits of the workers' compensation system, including medical treatment. Technically, medical treatment is considered a benefit of work comp. So you're injured at work, step one. Step two, you're given medical treatment and benefits to try to get better, essentially. While you're trying to get better, you have access to one benefit of the workers' compensation system, which is temporary disability, also known as TD. And temporary disability is always in the context of you recovering while unable to work. So temporary disability is not meant to replace your job or anything like that. It's a temporary thing while you recover, while you're undergoing medical treatment to try to recover your functionality and return to work. Eventually, this medical treatment comes to a certain point that we call P and S. This means essentially that your recovery has plateaued. You're not expected to get much better or much worse, even if you continue to get treatment. So you get, for example, various types of medical treatment in the workers' comp system. That might include physical therapy, acupuncture, surgery, injections, chiropractic, even functional restoration program. At a certain point, your doctor will say, they've had all this treatment, and yet their recovery has plateaued at a certain point. They've reached P&S. So P&S is permanent and stationary. It's also known as MMI, or maximum medical improvement. They are the same thing. So sometimes you'll see P&S/MMI. Sometimes you'll say P&S is the time at which you become MMI. I wouldn't worry about all those details. P&S or MMI just means your doctor believes you've reached a point where treatment will not help you very much anymore. Your recovery has plateaued. You're not expected to get much better or worse. Once you're P&S'd, that signals almost the end of your time in the program, or in the workers' comp system, And at that point, several things are triggered. You no longer have access to temporary disability, but you might be eligible for the voucher if you're not offered a job after you're P&S'd, and permanent disability comes into play if you've not fully recovered. So we're going to go over each of these in detail, so don't worry about it. We'll keep going over this stuff. Step 1, injury at work. Step 2, you undergo medical treatment of the system. You might have temporary disability while you do that. Eventually, you reach a plateau of P&S. You might have the voucher offered to you if you aren't offered a job. And permanent disability is determined based on the loss of function if you've not fully recovered. Finally, we have the end of your time in workers' compensation. When you resolve your claim resolution, also known as settlement. So we're going to talk about all of this step by step and hopefully make all of this clear. If you're in the functional restoration program, chances are you're around here. You are receiving medical treatment still in the system. Chances are you are not yet P&S. However, since FRP, the nature of FRP is that it's only available to you after you exhaust conservative care of physical therapy, etc. FRP is naturally kind of toward the end of your time in the workers' compensation system. It's one of the last treatments offered to patients. So if you aren't already P&S, you'll likely become P&S after FRP. Right, so FRP will represent essentially the most functional that your doctor believes you can be, and then they'll declare you P&S, and that will trigger the rest of this. So this is the same thing, just at a glance. Step 1, you had an injury and you filed your claim. Step 2, you get access to the benefits of the workers' compensation system, including medical care. At a certain point, that medical care stops helping you a lot. You reach a plateau where you're not going to get much better or worse for a while. That is P&S or MMI. That leads eventually to you resolving your claim in a certain way. You settle. So we'll talk about each of these steps. Let's start with right after step 1. You're injured and your claim has just been accepted. So what happens after injury? Working for your employer after injury. So after a job injury, staying at work or returning to work safely and promptly can help you in your recovery. It can also help you avoid financial losses from being off work. So the ideal of this system is that you're injured at work and you simply go back to your same job that you were doing as safely and as promptly as possible. This is good for at least 2 reasons, physically and financially. If you simply return to work, you are much more likely to recover. You're maintaining your similar levels of physical activity, you're still being social, and so on. These things help with your recovery. So staying at work, if you can do it safely and quickly, that's always best. Also, it helps you avoid financial losses because you're not working, right? So a lot of people, they don't want to work because they're injured, but don't understand the stress they're about to go under because they're not working and not able to provide for themselves and their families as well as before. So in general, it's ideal for you to return to the same work you were doing as quickly as possible, as long as it's safe. This is something I'll be repeating throughout this lecture, but it's virtually always better to regain your health and return to work rather than relying on benefits. Some people might think, oh, I'm just going to live off of temporary disability, I'm going to live off of my settlement. That's simply not realistic. It's not going to be enough for you, and even if you get a lot, Having your health and your functionality is worth much more than whatever you're going to get in the settlement. So aside from the issue of money, most people are not happy sitting around doing nothing for decades. Your health, functionality, and ability to provide for yourself and others are priceless. Right? So if you're in FRP, you should be trying as hard as possible to get as strong as you can be, as functional as you can be. Because your ability to live your life, your quality of life, you can't put a dollar sign to that. It's priceless. So some people might think I'm just going to be on disability benefits, but suppose you retire at 40 years old. You say, I don't want to work anymore. I'm in pain. I'm just going to retire. Well, then you'll be sitting at home alone while everyone works, not able to participate in things because you haven't put effort into recovery. And so you're just going to become depressed, sitting there alone, staring at the wall all day. So we want people to be as functional as possible, not just because it means you're more likely to return to work, but because it means you'll have a better quality of life. So again, it's virtually always better to regain your health and return to work rather than simply relying on benefits. That doesn't mean benefits are a crutch necessarily or anything like that. The benefits of the work comp system are good and you should use them if they're available to you, but it should not replace you being proactive in getting healthier and stronger. So you're injured. A lot of people wonder, can I stay at work? Can I return to work? What work can I do if I do return to work? Well, right after your injury, something called the primary treating physician, or PTP, what I will just call your doctor from now on, they examine you and send a report to the claims administrator or adjuster about your medical condition. So right after you're injured, you're assigned essentially a workers' compensation doctor, who is your PTP, your main work comp doctor. They send a report saying whether or not you can work. If the doctor reports you can't work at all while recovering, you can't be required to work. Right? So your doctor says it's unsafe, they're too injured to work, you cannot be forced to work. This is one of the protections of the workers' compensation system for employees. However, the doctor might say you are able to work, and if so, they have to describe work restrictions. Work restrictions are based on your job duties and intended to protect you from further injury. So for example, let's say you were in construction, you were lifting 100 pounds a lot, then you have a low back injury somehow. And your doctor says they can go back to work, however, with the restriction that there is no lifting over 20 pounds. A lot of people think this is a punishment. It feels like you're being punished in a way. However, these are to protect you from further injury. If your doctor gives you a restriction of no lifting over 20 pounds, that means they reasonably believe that if you were to go to work and lift something, say 25 pounds, you might injure yourself or aggravate your injury in some way. So again, these restrictions are to protect you and to basically make your employer try to find work within your restrictions that does not injure you. Also, some people are very afraid of being watched by workers' comp. There are some people who go around taking pictures and so on. However, if what you're doing is within your restrictions, then you have nothing to worry about. And if you're doing things outside of your restrictions, then they're either unsafe or your restrictions aren't correct, and you'll need to talk to your doctor and your attorney. And so again, work restrictions are to help you return to work in a safe way. They're not to punish you, and they protect you in many ways. So your doctor might put some work restrictions on there and any other changes to your work schedule needed, such as schedule assignment equipment changes. For example, say you're twisting your head a lot to answer the phone. Your doctor might say they can return to work, but they need a headset for the telephone. Or they might reduce your schedule and say they're only allowed to work 4 hours per day. And so again, these might feel like punishments, but they are meant to protect you, and your employer is then essentially forced to try to find work within these restrictions, so it's good for you. So if you're able to work with restrictions, if your doctor reports that you can stay at work or return to work with those restrictions we were just talking about, any work your employer assigns must meet these restrictions. Your employer may, for example, change certain tasks, reduce your time on certain tasks, or provide helpful equipment like we were just talking about. Or your employer may say that work like this isn't available. If that happens, you can't be required to work. So if your doctor says you can't work, you can't be required to work. And if your doctor says you can work but with restrictions, and your job says there's nothing available within those restrictions, again, you cannot be forced to work. If your employer can't give you work that meets work restrictions, that is what triggers temporary disability. Right? So again, temporary disability is payments for lost wages while you try to recover, and while you're not working. So during that time you're not working, you might take temporary disability and then undergo medical treatment to try to return to your work or something like it. Some people get injured and the doctor says you can go back to work full duty without restrictions. If so, that's great. That means your doctor believes that you are fully capable of performing your regular job duties. If your doctor reports that you can stay at work or return to your job without restrictions, your employer usually must give you the same job and pay you had before you were injured. The employer can require you to take the job because, of course, there is no medical reason for you not to, according to your doctor, if this is the case. This point where you can work without restrictions, that might be right after you're injured. Right? Say I roll my ankle really bad at work and then file a work comp claim. And then by the time I see my doctor, they say, yeah, you need some physical therapy, but you can return to work without restrictions. That happens a lot where it's right after the injury, or it might come to this point after you've been in medical treatment for a while. So maybe you've done some physical therapy, acupuncture, chiropractic, maybe you go to FRP even, and you get so much better that you don't even need work restrictions anymore. That is also possible, and then this case would apply to you. Right? Your employer must give you the same job and pay that you had before you were injured if you can work without restrictions. So when the doctor sends a report with your work restrictions or not, your employer has to respond with some kind of work if it's available. That might be regular work, modified work, or alternative work. Regular work is your usual job or position at the time of injury, and it should pay the same wages and benefits as before. Modified work is your old job. It's the same job, but with some changes, with some modifications based on your work restrictions. So if you're working with work restrictions at the same job you were at before, you probably have modified duty, modified work. If you're doing modified work, then you must be paid at least 85% of the wages and benefits you were paid at the time of injury. So it's a bit less, but you're still protected up to 85% of the wages you were making before your injury. Then there's also alternative work or alternate work. That just means a different job, essentially. Not your old job, a new job within the same employer, though. They might say it meets your work restrictions, but it's not your old job. That too must pay at least 85% of the wages and benefits you were paid at the time of injury. So one example of regular work, let's go back to the construction worker. They'll say, you can return to work without restrictions. So they go back, they get the same wages and benefits. Or maybe there's restrictions and say, you can go back, but you can't lift more than 20 pounds. That would be considered modified work. Or they might say, you can go back, but we're giving you a desk job. You're not going to be doing the same job at all. It's alternate work. Right? So that also must pay 85% of the wages and benefits. My employer won't offer or assign me the kind of work that I want. What can I do? Well, in some of the cases, the work assigned or offered to you might seem unfair, or your employer might not offer you work at all. Right? In that construction example, they might say, wow, your work restrictions are no lifting over 20 pounds. We don't have anything available for you. Everything we have available, you need to lift like 100 pounds. So your employer may not have work for you. And that's not personal. That's just kind of the reality of the situation. So an employer is not always required to offer you a job that you want either. There might not be any jobs you want that meet the doctor's work restrictions, or your employer's decision may be justified by business realities. So let's take that example where you're a construction worker, but you're offered a desk job. Maybe you'll say, I want to be outside. I want to be with everyone else. I want to be lifting things. I want the fresh air. I don't want to be cooped up in a desk job pushing paper. Well, that's too bad. If they have a job that's available to you that meets your restrictions, you should be taking that job. Right? They have no obligation to give you a job that you like or that you want. Those are not really considerations here. It's more about what job can you do? What are you capable of doing? That being said, if the reason your employer's not offering you work you want is because you have the injury in the first place or because you requested work comp benefits, that's illegal. That's retaliation. Right? So if they give you a bad job just because they're mad that you filed for work comp, that is illegal. Okay, so step 1, you're injured, you file that claim. Step 2, you start your treatment. And while you're in treatment, you could go one of several ways. Like I said before, you could just go back to your regular job without restrictions. In fact, that's ideal. You could go back to modified duty or light duty, which is a temporary assignment within the work restrictions assigned by your doctor. Or you might go on TTD, that's temporary total disability. Total in that phrase means you're not working at all. So while receiving that treatment, you might go on TTD. You might not work at all while you try to get better through medical treatment. One example, if you're watching this in FRP, is maybe you were doing modified duty at work and you were struggling, it was too painful, you're too limited. Sometimes your doctor will put you on temporary total disability or TTD for the duration of FRP. Right, so they'll put you on TTD for about 8 weeks while you basically focus all of your energy on proactively getting stronger, getting better, becoming more functional so that you can return to your job, hopefully. While you're getting medical treatment, all this treatment is considered one of several benefits you can receive while you're in the workers' compensation system. So just a little bit of review of those benefits. I've introduced most of these already, but we'll just go through them in more detail. First of all, there's medical care. This is the primary benefit of the workers' compensation system, is that everything is paid for by your employer's insurance to help you recover from an injury or illness caused by work. This includes all the treatment you're getting. Physical therapy, acupuncture, chiropractic, massage therapy, aquatic therapy, regular doctor visits, any tests, medicines, equipment, even travel costs such as mileage reimbursement to all of your appointments in the work comp system is available. Medical care also includes FRP, the Functional Restoration Program. So this is the primary benefit, like I said, that you can undergo extensive care and not pay a thing. The other benefits are temporary and permanent disability are the main ones. So temporary disability benefits are payments if you lose wages because your injury prevents you from doing your usual job while recovering. I emphasize while recovering. It is not meant for you to take temporary disability and just sit around. It is in the context that you are actively trying to get better while you're on temporary disability. Again, this is meant to be temporary until you recover. Temporary disability is usually 2/3 of pay. Just to go back for 1 second, temporary disability is while you're going through medical care, right? So the step 2 in that plan that we were looking at before, permanent disability is after you are P&S'd, right? So permanent disability are payments if you don't recover completely and your injury causes a permanent loss of physical or mental function that a doctor can measure. So at the point of P&S, that is when it's determined if you have any kind of permanent loss of function, and that is what permanent disability compensates for. That permanent disability then becomes your settlement. It is the same thing. So there's medical care, temporary and permanent disability. There's also something called the Supplemental Job Displacement Benefit, better known as the voucher. So a voucher is available to help pay for retraining or skill enhancement if you're eligible to receive permanent disability, your employer doesn't offer you work, and you don't return to work for your employer. So those are the criteria for the voucher. We'll go over those in more detail later. But basically, the voucher is available after you're P&S'd and your employer still doesn't have any work for you. So the idea is that you get this voucher so you can retrain. You can go back to school. You can go get different skills that might get you a different job since your employer is not offering you anything. The voucher is for anyone injured 2004 or later. Right now, it's a maximum of $6,000. You should always check on this with your attorney and with the latest information because things change every year in workers' compensation. Finally, there's something called death benefits. I tell you about this just to be comprehensive. This is the last benefit of workers' compensation, is that for spouse, children, or other dependents, if you die from a job injury or illness, they are entitled to death benefits. Hopefully that's not the case for any of you watching this. You're not you're not dead, hopefully. And so this doesn't apply. So I won't be mentioning it more in this. We'll review each type of these benefits, other than the death benefits, in more detail as we go through the rest of this lecture. So one more time, I want to say that benefits are not a replacement for a healthy body. Temporary disability, permanent disability, your settlement from that permanent disability, that is not meant to replace you trying to get better, and it certainly can never replace having a healthy, functional body. Temporary and permanent disability can help offset financial needs, but they're not a good replacement for getting stronger and healthier. Being able to work is virtually always better than relying on benefits or hoping for a big settlement. First of all, it's not realistic that you'll be able to live off of a settlement. They're simply not big enough anymore. And secondly, as we talked about before, being functional, being able to live your life is priceless. It's much better than simply living off of disability. So real quick, temporary disability payments are 2/3 of your wages. There's a minimum around $170 a week and a maximum around $1,200 a week, depending on your earnings. So there is a maximum, and there's a time limit. Temporary disability is, in fact, temporary. So it lasts 2 years, maximum. There's some other reasons it might end as well, and we'll go through that. In other words, you can't live off of this forever. Permanent disability depends on your injury or disability rating. It's based on your permanent loss of function, right? So once you're P&S'd and you're expected not to recover much, they basically say, well, do you still have some loss of function compared to pre-injury? And that leads to your settlement. The permanent disability converts into your settlement. They're essentially the same thing. So one example is an amputation of an index finger. That's a pretty important finger, I would say, from a 2014 injury, because the amount changes based on what year you're injured. The amputation of that finger is a $9,000 settlement, a $9,000 permanent disability. Losing an eye, entirely losing their eye, is $35,000. Your settlement is based on your permanent disability, like I keep saying. You can't live on $9,000 or even $100,000 forever. And believe me, you're probably not going to be getting $100,000. That is like the high end of settlements for people that are extremely impaired. Even if you did get $100,000, think about your annual salary that you made before your injury. How many years is that? Right? So how long are you going to be able to live off of this? It's really not meant for that, right? So again, benefits are not a replacement for a healthy, functional body. Just at a glance, the average settlement in California is between $2,000 and $20,000. Even if you got $70,000, over 3 times the average. How long can you live on that? Once you spend $70,000, say on rent and food, what happens then? Right? A healthy body, being able to provide for yourself, being able to work, being able to be functional in general, that is what you want. What kind of quality of life will you have if you're not productive or incapable of participating in activities? Suppose you do get a giant settlement, but you're not able to walk your dog. You're not able to lift up your grandkid. You're not able to go on walks with your family. Right? Is that really worth it? So again, you proactively getting stronger and healthier is always best. Of course, you should get all the benefits you're entitled to, but that cannot replace a healthy body. So going back to our path through the workers' comp system, step 1, you're injured and you file a claim. Step 2, you get treatment and benefits. And while you are getting that treatment, temporary disability might be available to you while you recover if unable to work. So the question is, what happens if I can't return to work immediately? For many people, they're injured, they start treatment, they can't immediately return to work. How does that work, right? So that is when temporary disability kicks in. What are temporary disability benefits? If your injury prevents you from doing your usual job while you're recovering, you may be eligible for temporary disability or TD benefits. TD benefits are paid only while you are recovering. TD benefits are payments you receive if you lose wages because your treating doctor says you're unable to do your usual job and your employer does not offer you other work that pays your usual wages. So maybe you can't go back to work and do your usual job, but sometimes your employer does offer you other work that pays the same wages. You're basically forced to take that job, and you do not have access to temporary disability. So most people are in this situation where your doctor says you can't work and the employer does not offer you work. Right? So they'll say you can't work at all, then you get access to temporary disability. Or they might say you can work but with these restrictions, and if your employer doesn't have any work available, that also means you're entitled to temporary disability. What are the different types of TD benefits? There's basically two types. One is that you can't work at all. You used to work 40 hours, for example. Now you work 0. That is temporary total disability, TTD. Total refers to the fact that you are not working at all. Sometimes people do some work, and employer offers this type of work, then you can go on temporary partial disability, TPD. Partial means you are partially working, partially not. Either way, TD benefits are 2/3 of the wages you lose while you're recovering from a job injury. There are some limits, so there's no more than a maximum, no less than a minimum set by law, and those numbers change every year. So you'll have to look those up. Ask your attorney about this. One good thing, though, is you are getting 2/3 of your wages, so you're getting less. However, you don't pay taxes on temporary disability benefits. You don't pay federal, state, or local income taxes, or Social Security taxes, or dues, or anything that you would normally contribute from your paycheck. So it actually does kind of even out that you're getting 2/3, but you don't pay taxes. So a lot of people are paid essentially the same thing that they were when they were working. Right? This can confuse some people and make them believe that they can live off this. However, again, it's not a replacement for a healthy body, and it's temporary. It will go away eventually. How much do you actually get week to week with temporary disability? Determining the exact amount can be complicated. There's basically this complicated mathematical formula that's used, and a lot of different things factor in. So, for example, if you had a second job, if your wages were rising and falling, if you got tips, if you got bonuses, those all affect how much you get. So how much are TD benefits? Again, they are 2/3 of lost wages. Temporary total disability is 2/3 of your total wages because you're losing all of your wages. Partial is 2/3 of whatever wages you have lost. So one example is you used to work 40 hours, you made $2,000 a week, you were doing pretty good. And let's say now you only work 30 hours, right? So you've lost 10 hours of work, and now you only make $1,500 a week. Technically, the lost wages are $500 a week. You used to make $2,000, now you make $1,500, so the lost wages are $500 a week. TPD applies to the wages you lost, not to the whole thing. So 2/3 of $500 would be $333, and you would not owe taxes on that. When do those TD payments begin? Well, your first TD payment is due within 14 days after your employer learns that you have a job injury or illness, and your doctor says your injury prevents you from doing your job. Right, so we gave these examples earlier where your doctor says you can't work at all, or they say you can work with restrictions, but your employer doesn't have any jobs for you. TD's due within 14 days of that moment, essentially. You should get a letter with the first payment explaining how the payment amount was calculated. So they'll explain it to you. TD is paid every 2 weeks as long as you're eligible. When do TD payments end? So there are several things that will trigger the end to temporary disability payments, and this seems to catch a lot of patients by surprise. So if any of these are the case, TD will automatically stop. If your doctor says you can return to your usual job, temporary disability is not available to you anymore, or at all. Why? Because temporary disability is while you recover. If you can return to your usual job, you don't need to recover, so you do not have access to TD. TD payments will also end if you return to your usual job or modified or alternative work at your regular wages. So if they give you something at your regular full wages, that also means you do not have access to TD. One thing this is the one that seems to catch people by surprise, one of them at least, is when you reach the point of P&S, that point is when your condition's not improving and not getting worse much, right? You've reached P&S or MMI. That triggers the end of temporary disability. Again, if your condition is not getting much better anytime soon, you're not recovering, so temporary disability does not apply. Finally, the other thing that catches people by surprise is that temporary disability is a finite amount. It is a maximum of 104 weeks, which is 2 years. Each year is 52 weeks, so 104 weeks is 2 years of temporary disability benefits maximum. Doesn't necessarily have to be all in a row. Maybe you go on temporary disability for a couple weeks at first, and then later you go on it for a few months. However, you have 2 years total. So it doesn't matter exactly when you take this temporary disability, you never get more than 2 years of it, or 104 weeks. So when your temporary disability payments end, the adjuster is mandated to send you a letter explaining why the payments are ending. They must list all the payments sent to you, and it has to be sent to you within 2 weeks after your final payment. So some people say they were never told that their temporary disability ended, or why, or any of that. Well, the truth is you were sent a letter at some point. It might have been a letter in a giant stack of paper with all your other letters, but they are mandated to send this letter to you. If your treating doctor says you'll never recover completely, aka P&S, you may be eligible to receive permanent disability and or the voucher. All right, so once that TD ends, if it's because of P&S, then you kind of switch over into these other benefits of potentially the voucher and permanent disability. All right, so we've gone through step 1, right after your injury, what happens. Step 2, while you're in medical treatment, we went over temporary disability. Now, when you reach step 3, P&S or MMI, the question is, what happens if I don't fully recover? Right, so you go through all this treatment, you reach P&S, which means you're not going to get much better even with further treatment. You may not be fully recovered to the exact point you were before your injury. So what happens if I don't fully recover? Your doctor may determine that you'll never be able to return to the same job or working conditions you had before you were injured. This is reported in a P&S report. The report should include permanent work restrictions to protect you from further injury. Can I return to my work? Can I return to work for my employer even if I don't fully recover? It depends on whether your employer can offer you a suitable job. If not, you might be eligible for some other benefits. Right, so once you're P&S'd, basically a letter is sent to your employer asking, can you accommodate this person within the permanent work restrictions? The employer can say no for various reasons, right? So that if the employer does not offer you work, if they don't offer you modified or alternative work, and your injury has caused some kind of permanent loss of function, the adjuster must send you a supplemental job displacement benefit or voucher. Check with your attorney if you're eligible. So this is the point that triggers the voucher. You've gone through treatment, you're declared P&S, your employer is asked if you have any work, and they say no. That means the adjuster should automatically send you the voucher at that point. When you're P&S, the employer could offer you work. Right? So if your employer can offer you work, the adjuster must send you a notice of regular modified alternative work within 60 days after your P&S. So after your P&S, there's a 60-day period where your employer can think about whether or not they're going to offer you work. Again, many people are considered P&S after FRP, as it's often the last treatment attempted to improve the patient's condition. So if you're in FRP watching this should not catch you by surprise. I've mentioned this a couple times already, that by its nature, FRP is already usually the last treatment really attempted for many people, and therefore, once it's over, your doctor will likely declare you P&S and move you through the rest of the system. So when you're offered a job at this point, the offer must be for a job that you're able to perform. Again, this is one of the benefits of, or I should say the protections of the workers' comp system, that the job offered has to meet the work restrictions in the doctor's report, It has to last at least 12 months, so they can't just give you a job for a week and then fire you. And finally, it has to be within a reasonable commuting distance of where you lived at the time of injury. So if you lived in the Bay Area and you worked there, they can't say, oh, we do have a job, but it's in San Diego, right? That's not a reasonable commute. That would be considered retaliation, right? They're trying to punish you for this, and that's illegal. So any work offered to you has to fit these criteria. If your employer offers you work, you are not eligible for the voucher. That might be upsetting, but the entire purpose of the voucher is to retrain you and give you skills to find a different job. If your employer is offering you work, you don't need the voucher, basically. Speaking of which, so what if I'm P&S and I'm still unable to return to my job? You could be eligible for the voucher. So a little bit more about this voucher. The Supplemental Job Displacement Benefit is the formal name of this. So if you ever say CSJDB or Supplemental Job Displacement Benefit, that refers to the voucher. They're all referring to the same thing. There are some new rules that applied in 2013. However, everyone injured after 2013 has the exact same rules. A Supplemental Job Displacement Benefit is a voucher that promises to help pay for educational retraining or skill enhancement, or both, at eligible schools. It's not for everything, right? So this is not to get you a new car. This is not to fund your vacation to Tahiti. This is specifically for educational retraining or skill enhancement. You can use the voucher to pay for tuition, fees, books, tools, or other expenses such as licensing certification fees, exam prep course fees, things like that. How much is it? It's redeemable up to $6,000 as of now. I'm recording this in the middle of 2023, regardless of your permanent disability rating. So it's $6,000 regardless of if you have a very low disability rating, a very low settlement, or a very high permanent disability rating. It has nothing to do with that. It's separate. This has to do with the fact that you're a P&S and not offered a job, so you need skill retraining. Right, so it's always up to $6,000 as of now, and you cannot redeem the voucher as part of a settlement of your case. All right, you can't just say, oh, we'll just add the voucher to the settlement. They are different things. There are some rules about how you use this money. So, for example, up to $600 of that can pay for the services of a job placement agency, a return to work counselor, or resume preparation. You can use up to $1,000 to purchase computer equipment. There's a lot of great laptops and computers and equipment that can be purchased for well under $1,000. And then you can use this to look for new jobs. You can use this at your new job, whatever you like. Up to $500 of the money can be used upon request for miscellaneous expenses without receipts or other documentation. That being said, everything in the work comp system, you should keep very good documentation. And if you spend any money, you should always keep the receipts. How do I get this benefit? Well, your adjuster essentially sends it to you if you meet the criteria. If you think you meet the criteria and you haven't gotten it, you should contact your attorney. The adjuster must offer you the voucher if the following are true. Your injury causes permanent disability of some kind. In other words, a permanent loss of function after your P&S, and your employer does not offer you any kind of work within 60 days after your declared P&S. So again, there is a 60-day period where they can deliberate about offering you work or not. At the end of that period, if you're not offered work, that should trigger the voucher. When do I get it? Again, after your P&S and have permanent restrictions, your employer has 60 days to offer work. If you're not offered work by the end of this time period, the voucher must be offered within 20 days. So there's the P&S, and then there's 60 days after that where they can offer you a job. And then if they don't offer you that job, the adjuster then has 20 days to offer you the voucher. What schools can I attend? Ask the school. The school will know if they take the voucher. There's also a list online on the EDD's website. You can Google it, the eligible training provider list. Same with vocational and return to work counselors. Ask the counselor if they take the voucher. You don't want to pay for something and then ask afterward for reimbursement. You want to make sure that you're going to get reimbursed before you pay for something. So please ask the school or these counselors if they take the voucher. The state maintains a list of vocational return to work counselors that do take the voucher at DWC's website, the Department of Work Comp. So you can Google that as well. Is there a deadline for using the voucher? Of course, you can't wait like 40 years and then redeem the voucher. The voucher expires either 2 years after the date the voucher is furnished to you, or 5 years after your date of injury, whichever is later. This confuses a lot of people, but it's basically 2 different dates. Think about the date of 2 years after the voucher is issued to you, and then think of the date 5 years after you were injured in the first place. Which date is later? That is when the voucher expires. All expenses must be incurred and submitted with required receipts and documentation before the expiration date. So you need to submit those receipts before that 2-year mark or 5-year mark, as the case may be. Again, you should always keep documentation and receipts of everything related to the workers' comp system. On top of this $6,000, there is potentially extra $5,000 available if you qualify for the voucher. This comes from kind of a different department. It comes from the Return to Work Supplement program. You get mailed a single, one-time, lump sum $5,000 check used to supplement the earnings loss from being injured. So again, there's a $6,000 voucher, and the way you use that voucher, there are rules, right? Only certain amounts can be used for certain things. On top of that $6,000 voucher, they now often also give a $5,000 check, and that can be used as desired. The $5,000 can be used however you want. You can go to Tahiti if you want to with that. The $6,000 of the voucher itself must be used for retraining and skill enhancement. So we've gone through the injury, gone through treatment and temporary disability while you're going through treatment and recovering. Eventually you reach the plateau point of P&S. If you're not offered a job, you might be eligible for the voucher. And also when you're P&S and still not fully recovered functionally, that might trigger permanent disability. So what if I'm P&S and I'm still unable to return to my job? What are PD benefits? What are permanent disability benefits? Most workers recover from their job injuries, but some continue to have problems. If your treating doctor says you'll never recover completely, or you'll always be limited in the work you can do, you may have a permanent disability. So basically, you go through treatment and hopefully you recover and you just go back to work and that's that. However, many people go through treatment and they do not recover completely. There's some loss of function. Permanent disability is meant to cover that loss of function. So you go through treatment, eventually you're P&S'd. The P&S report affects your disability rating, which affects the amount of your PD benefits. That means that you may be eligible for permanent disability benefits. You don't have to lose your job to be eligible for PD. So again, you could be working and still have permanent disability. Permanent disability doesn't mean you can't work. It means that you have a permanent loss of function. Even if it's a small permanent loss of function, it's still a permanent loss of function and you're eligible for permanent disability. What's a P&S report? We've talked about this a lot, so you should basically know by this point. But when you reach a point where your medical condition is not improving or getting worse, your condition is called permanent and stationary. This is referred to as the point in time when you've reached MMI, or maximal medical improvement. When you reach P&S or MMI, that's when your doctor writes a P&S report and sends it to the adjuster. That report has a bunch of information in it and it's all very important. So in that report, they should describe the specific medical problems that you have, such as how much you can move the injured body parts and how much pain you have. They'll also talk about any limits to the work you can do, which are your permanent work restrictions. Any medical care that you may need in the future for your injury. Again, this is in the context of being P&S, so they don't expect you to get much better. They don't expect you to regain function, but there's some medical care that's considered maintenance. Right? You might continue to go to physical therapy to maintain your condition, but there isn't an expectation that you'll get much better. The P&S report also includes whether or not you can return to your old job and an estimate of how much of your disability is caused by your job as opposed to any other factors. It's very important that your P&S report will affect your future benefits. P&S Report is what goes into your permanent disability determination, and then your settlement basically is your permanent disability. So you have a right to receive a copy of the P&S report. Make sure it's accurate. Make sure nothing is totally wrong. However, doctors use special language to describe your disability. It's very technical. They're trained in it specifically for disability rating, and that language affects your benefits. So if you're not trained in it, it's very hard to understand what they're saying exactly. You might get the wrong idea. So you should always confer with your doctor and or your attorney about this. You have a right to challenge the P&S report if you think it's inaccurate. How is your disability rated? Well, a rating is a percentage, literally a number, like 10%, that estimates how much your disability limits the kinds of work you can do or your ability to earn a living. It determines the amount of your PD benefits. A P&S report is the first major step in the rating process. When your treating doctor writes the P&S report, he or she must rate your impairment or how much you've lost the normal use of injured parts of your body. Some people get really upset with this rating. They think the doctor is paid off to give them a really low rating. That is not true. Doctors are not paid by anyone to give a higher or lower rating. That would be very illegal. Right? So a rating is not just a doctor's personal opinion. It's based on objective assessments. That's based on their clinical expertise and established guidelines. There's literally tables and charts in guidelines to help doctors determine the impairment percentage. So they're not just making this up. It is based on objective findings. They're not paid by anyone to give a higher or lower rating. That is a conflict of interest and would be illegal. So next, your attorney or the adjuster can ask a disability rater to rate your disability based on the P&S report. Or if you're examined by a QME and don't have an attorney, a disability rater gets automatically assigned and rates your disability. You have a right to challenge the rating. Again, that rating is determined by a very complex mathematical formula. It's not personal, and they're doing this objectively as possible. So once your permanent disability is determined, the amount of benefits are set by law. Again, not by personal choice or opinion, by law. And the adjuster will determine how much to pay you based on a few factors. So there's a complex mathematical formula, like I said. It takes into account the rating of your disability, what year your injury was in, your wages before you were injured, whether or not your employer offers you work meeting the requirements, your age, and a bunch of other factors. When do you actually get permanent disability payments? Well, if you have permanent total disability, which is 100% impairment, which means you're pretty much paralyzed, you're eligible to receive PD payments for the rest of your life. However, most do not get a 100% rating. If you're watching this in FRP, almost impossible that you're going to be getting a rating like this. So for everyone else, if you were offered a job, permanent disability comes after settlement. If you're not offered a job, PD is due within 14 days after the final temporary disability payment, or after the adjuster learns your P&S and found to have permanent impairments. So this is, again, what confuses people is sometimes you get P&S'd, that means the end of temporary disability, but that also potentially triggers permanent disability within 14 days. PD benefits are paid every 2 weeks. Those payments end when you reach the maximum amount allowed by law, or when you settle your case and receive a lump sum. So again, if you have permanent total disability, you might get those payments for the rest of your life. But for pretty much everyone else, you have permanent partial disability, technically, and there is a finite amount. Yes, it's called permanent disability, but the payments are temporary. They end. They are finite. And that permanent disability amount, that is either dispersed in a lump sum at your settlement or dispersed through payments. Right? So this amount that you get, the permanent disability, is your settlement. So how do you actually get that amount? First, it starts with medical treatment. Hopefully you get better, but eventually you get P&S'd by your primary doctor or QME. At that point, you get a disability rating. That rating then factors in with that mathematical formula to determine your actual permanent disability amount, and that amount is your settlement. It turns into your settlement. You might get a little bit of it before your settlement if that case applies to you, but then you get the rest in your settlement. Speaking of which, settlement, we've gone through step 1 through 3. You're injured, you have treatment, you reach B&S, and then that triggers essentially the end of your work comp claim. You'll settle soon after, most likely. So can my case be settled? Yes, of course. After your disability is rated, the adjuster may offer to settle your case. A settlement is technically an agreement between you and the adjuster. There's 2 different ways to settle your case. One's called C&R, compromise and release, which is basically a big lump sum payment of all of your permanent disability at once. 2 is called STIPs, or future medical, stipulations with request for award. That is the other way to settle your case, and we are going to talk about both of these. So number 1, compromise and release, C&R. You get a single payment. The adjuster agrees to pay you a lump sum, and that covers all PD payments you haven't received yet. So it may be that you haven't gotten any permanent disability yet, no payments have gone out yet, then you get the entire permanent disability amount awarded to you in a single lump sum. Again, that settlement is your permanent disability. Medical care, if you settle C&R, the lump sum above technically covers the estimated costs of future medical care, and the adjuster will no longer pay your doctor. This becomes your responsibility. In other words, you can no longer be treated within the workers' compensation system. And some providers, some private medical providers will not touch a work injury. Right? So you have to make a determination of if this is right for you, if you aren't really going to be needing medical care for your work injury after your settlement. No changes in benefits, so you don't have the right to request additional workers' comp benefits if your condition gets worse. And on the flip side, the adjuster doesn't have the right to request your benefits reduced if your condition improves. So it's basically a one-time thing. You get your PD paid out, and you don't get any future medical care for your work injury. The other is STIPs, or future medical. For that, you and the adjuster agree when and how long you'll receive permanent disability payments, and you'll agree how much each payment will be. So your permanent disability is a certain amount. If you settle stipulations with request for award, if you settle with future medical, then that PD is paid out in payments over time. You do continue to get medical care. That's what future medical refers to. The adjuster usually agrees to keep paying for medical care for your injury as long as care is needed. There are some possible changes in benefits we'll talk about in a second, and it's generally considered maintenance. You're not expected to get much better or much worse, right? You're already P&S, you've settled, but you still think that you need some medical care for your work injury, such as ongoing physical therapy or acupuncture as an example, then you might want future medical. There are some possible changes in benefits, so benefits can change based on if you get much better or worse within 5 years after the date of your injury. Some people settle after that point anyways. However, each of these has its own advantages and disadvantages. You have to weigh those. Please consult with your attorney if you have one and make the best choice for yourself. So just visually, this is what's happening. At the point of claim resolution, which means the end of your claim, you settle either C&R or future medical. If you settle C&R, your PD is paid out in a lump sum, and you don't get any further medical. If you settle for future medical, your PD is paid out in payments until it's gone, and future medical care is accepted for your work injury. Again, you're probably here in this range. You can see the average work comp settlements in California. You can see that over half, 55% of settlements fall between $2,000 and $20,000. Over half of everyone gets no more than $20,000, and probably somewhere in between there. If you're in FRP and watching this, you're probably in this range between $2,000 and $40,000. Of course, there's a ton of factors that go into the amount of your permanent disability in your settlement, but statistically speaking, and knowing the functional level of people in the FRP, chances are your settlement will be around here. Think about your annual salary compared to this settlement. How many years will it last you? Look at the very top of this, right? It goes up to $60,000 to $100,000. Only 8% of settlements get that, and they are by definition the most impaired. All right? So even if you got the highest amount here, how many years of your annual salary would that last you? Here's another one. The average compensation overall is $21,800. Typical compensation ranges from $17,000 to $27,000. You can see some other stats here where If you hire a lawyer, you get a few $1,000s more on average. If you don't hire a lawyer, you get a few $1,000s less on average. If you accept the first offer, you get much less. If you negotiate, you tend to get more. In other words, having an attorney can be pretty important for your permanent disability and your settlement. So again, look at this and think to yourself, having a healthy body is going to be worth a lot more than trying to live off of this settlement for the rest of your life. It's just not going to be possible. So that's it. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please ask your doctor. Please ask your attorney. They're the ones you should go to with any questions about workers' compensation. But hopefully this was helpful for you guys and helped clear some things up. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.